Webinar hosted by the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. My name is Mark Skidmore. I'm the director, and today we have what I think is a really great presentation about a new resource for the North Central region. About a year and a half ago, the Extension Directors explored ways in which we could perhaps, as an extension group, have an impact on poverty. And so that motivated us to think a little more carefully about what poverty looks like in the North Central region. And so this project is the end result. And so today's webinar is titled Dimensions of Poverty, North Central Region of the U.S. It's a new website with lots of resources. Our presenters are Beaulieu. He's the director of the Purdue Center for Regional Development and Assistant Director of Extension Community Development Program at Purdue University. We also have Andrey Kumar, who is Regional Planner and GIS Spatial Analysis Guru at the Purdue Center for Regional Development, as well as Zhalnin. She is also a GIS specialist for the center there. So without further ado, before we get into the presentation, I just wanted to summarize. I'll let you know we have some upcoming webinars. On Friday, we have a webinar with Sam Quinones, author of Dreamland. So that's on Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, and then you can see several others a little further down the road in the new year. So please keep those in mind. And so without further ado, I'd like to pass on the presentation to Bo and Indraneel and Andrey. Thank you so much for being here and for working on this great new resource.
Thank you very much, Mark, and welcome everybody. We're glad to, as they say, technology is great until it doesn't work quite right, and but we're glad that we got our glitches figured out here. This is Beaulieu, as Mark indicated. I'm at Purdue University, and we want to share with you some work we've been doing. And by the way, the Sam Quinones that you just heard about, I've heard him speak. He's a phenomenal speaker. So for those of you who would like to join Mark's webinar in a couple of days, I urge you to do so. It's a phenomenal book he wrote, and I think you'll find quite value in it. What I'd like to do is tell you a little bit of how this project came about. Mark gave you a little bit of background about it. But I do want to acknowledge some other entities that were instrumental in the kind of work we did. A lot of the work we did, both conceptually and methodologically, came out of a cooperative agreement we had with the Economic Research Service. A number of the team members there worked closely with us at Purdue, not only people here at the Purdue Center for Regional Development, but also people in the Department of Agricultural Economics here at Purdue. We had quite an extensive team working on this, and we complemented the work that ERS was doing. Ours was more place-based. Theirs was much more focused on individual and family attributes that promote, or at least that are related to poverty. So we took the lead role in the data harmonization since 1970, and Indraneel Kumar will give you a whole lot more detail about that. Our webinar today is going to have a little bit, part of it will be very, very technical, particularly for those of you listening in who are researchers who would like to know a lot more about the DNA of how the data were put together. And others of you who are much more practitioners will talk a lot about how we think that this website would be of value to you as well. So as Mark indicated, about 2 years ago, about 2017, and the North Central Regional Center provided funding to further advance kind of the work that we did with ERS, in particular looking at poverty in the context of the 12 states that constitute the North Central region. In addition to that, we at our center also are at the EDA University Center, and some of the funding we got from EDA further complemented or supplemented the funding that Mark gave us. This ended up being a very, very rigorous and very time-intensive activity, so we're able to get some of our EDA University Center funding to help support the work on this as well. So we're going to give you a little bit of update on what we're up to, and we're going to give you a demonstration of the website. So for those of you who are on here to see both a little bit of the overview of the center, of the website, but also would like to know how you make maximum use of the website, we're going to really do a little bit of that today. So I'm going to shift over now to Indraneel Kumar, who will talk a little bit about the data harmonization process.
Thank you, Bo. So essentially, the project required developing a database at the county and sub-county level for the entire U.S. and starting from 1970. So as you can see, the sub-county or census tract data becomes challenging because the geography changes every decade, every decennial census. Not only that, the coverage also varies quite a bit. So we know that census tracts were actually first conceptualized a long time ago. Dr. Laidlaw, it was for enumeration, but it was only in 1990 that entire US was covered by census tract, and 1970 and 1980 were mainly urban tracts, and that is where the harmonization became challenging. It was a process that how can we develop a consistent census tract database for the 5 decades for approximately 72,000 tracts, but then also account for county boundary changes. There were some county boundary changes in the last decennial censuses. So how did we do the harmonization process? This is sort of like a hybrid database. We have tried to utilize some of the work that has been developed previously, which is available in the public domain. But in general, when a tract changes in the data science, there are 2 types of processes. One is one-to-many. So, right, the population grows, a single tract can split into many tracts, and the reverse is population decline, and many tracts are merging into a single tract. So both type of processes are going on. In reality, it is more complex, right? So the merger and split can happen for the portions of the census tract, and then we need a reference decade or a reference year. In this case, it was 2010, so that all the census tract geography could be harmonized. But essentially, it is about developing some fractions and assigning some weights. So these 2 charts actually give us a little bit more detail on that. So there, the NHGIS website, which is housed at University of Minnesota, which is now known as IPUMS, has all the historical census attribute data. And then the next task was using the weights table. So we used a portion of the weights table which has been developed at Brown University, and I will be showing a complete database schematic to show where some of the public domain weights table are have been used, and some we have added on our own. So you are multiplying these weights and attribute data and then harmonizing the attribute value for 2010 as the reference year or reference decade. The point is to identifying and assigning a unique ID for each of these census tract, correct? So, you know, the census tract has been harmonized. That means now the geography is consistent, and each of these geography has a unique ID. The challenge with harmonization is like, you know, when you are multiplying with weights, you need to reiterate that process because the sum total may be different. So when we were doing these iterations, about in 1 or 2 iterations, the distribution was coming like 0.04% within that margin, because, you know, we know the control total, right? We know the county total, we know the US total. So we had these control totals to assign the sum of the attribute values. Now this is a pretty large schematic, but let me explain how this entire database looks like. So this, in the left hand side, the sepia color box is the entire database. These are weights table. These are crosswalks that has been developed at Brown University, and there are there are papers, and then there are all the documentations that are available in public domain, and papers have been written by Logan, Zhu, and Stultz, and there are several papers out there, and they have harmonized the census tract data, the crosswalks for 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, and harmonized it for 2010, and this was the foundation base. Now, as I told earlier, that 1970 and 1980 was not entirely tracked. Only the urban areas were tracked. So there was a remainder of the US where tract data was not available, and we needed census tract data going back to 1970. So we developed, at Purdue, we developed our own process for the remainder of the county, right? So we know the county total. So we knew the remainder of the attribute data, and these 2010 geographies were reinserted, and this is in the middle of the chart, which is where the county remainder database is written. So we reinserted those geographies and assigned the value. Now developing a database, it's like reinserting the database. So back in time, we tried to take some help from the land satellite imageries, but such high quality imageries are not available, and the reason this kind of work can be further refined if such high quality imageries can be available, because you need to account for the water areas, correct? The population can only be assigned to the land area. Then in the top left hand side corner, we also harmonized the county databases, because there were 140 or so very distinct changes in counties that happened. So we did that in-house so that the county database is also consistent to 2010. So one example is, for example, we all know that Broomfield County came out, right, in Colorado, and Yellowstone County was carved out. So there were some distinct county changes which we accounted for. And then the third component is some of the demographic variable. We developed an annualized tract database. And this is important because our researchers in AgEcon and ERS, and they have been developing some econometric models. They also needed the annualized data. So we had to, for some of the indicators, basically race, ethnicity, and population, we had to go with annual interpolation process. And the reason is the entire project is actually exploring the individual, some neighborhood level characteristics, which is coming from tracts, and then some county level characteristics, and then trying to develop some insights into the process of economic mobility. The individual data is coming from PSID, which is housed at University of Michigan. So how this filling in of 1970 and 1980 helps in the process? So this is just one example. In the left hand side, you can see if you had harmonized the original tract data, a major portion of US would have been empty because there is no tracts which are available. But with our data, you can see that the people were there, means the black race was there. The only thing is at the tract level, the data was not collected. And then on the right hand side, I am just trying to give an example of the way you can use some of the definition query in GIS. So what happens is, if you use your definition query, you can, so it can only extract those tracts. And this includes our filling in of tracts as well as existing original harmonized tracts where blacks are actually present, right? So in your database, there can be some geographies where it is genuinely, the value is 0, and you need to know that. Now very quickly into the fixed ratio interpolation, quite a bit of work went behind this, right? Means people who are from engineering discipline, they know and they use all variety of interpolation, but this is demographic and socio-economic databases, and here actually we are using an interpolation method which has also been suggested by United Nations Development Program, especially in those cases where you are working in developing economies and the conditions are data sparse. So at the sub-county level in US, at the tract level, annual data is actually not available. It's a data sparse condition. So the way you interpolate is you are interpolating the ratios, and because the county annual data are available, and that's how you are trying to estimate. So you have the fixed 2 point. So one is say 1970 decadal point, 1980 decadal point, and then you have a ratio interpolation. Our researchers at ERS, they had experimented with variety of interpolation methods, and they also suggested that this will be a relatively suitable approach rather than a non-linear type interpolation or other kinds, because the socioeconomic means we have two ends fixed, right? Means we know the county and tract data in the decadal census period. So this way we were able to develop some annual insights databases for race and ethnicity and population and poverty rate and unemployment rate. We should also express our thanks to Bureau of Labor Statistics, because they actually opened their archives. Some of the old data they actually had to, those are not available on web. We had to contact them, and they gave us the archive data, and this way we were able to build a longitudinal database. So the screen is not actually coming good. These are actually animations for 40 years. So maybe if Rosa can take her cursor and click, the PowerPoint will actually run 40 years of animation for the Wayne County, which is Detroit, and you can see how Bo has run it. Thank you, Bo. And actually you can see how the black population has actually spread out, and this is one advantage of annual interpolation, is you can actually now visualize data in space and time. And similarly, this is Cook County, Chicago, and let's run it. And you can actually see as the time goes by, the black population, they are actually moving towards Indiana, and that is the Gary area. So everybody should click on their computer on their screen. Okay. So everybody, if you can go and click on the computer on the screen, you can see the animation. So if you take your cursor, and there is a play button there, you can actually run it from your monitor. You can run the animation, and you should be able to see 40 years of change of what has happened in Detroit and Chicago. So this is one of the capacity of database that we wanted to share, because this gives insight into the space-time perspective. And now I will hand it over to Bo.
Thank you very much, Indraneel. And for those of you who are on the webinar, who really are the research, are part of the research community, we really felt we wanted to give you a really kind of a deep dive in this thing. And by the way, if you're interested, we do have information on the technical documentation of the harmonization process. We have it on our website. My recommendation is you write to Indraneel. His email is very easy, ikumar@purdue.edu. ikumar@purdue.edu. We have it on our website, but it'll be a whole lot easier for you just to contact Indraneel, and he'll be glad to send you the documentation about with regard to the harmonization process. And again, we recognize the work that ERS did with us as well, and our Department of Agricultural Economics colleagues. So now I'm going to get much more into a little bit of the overview of the site, and of course Andrey will also join me in a minute to try to walk you through some of the platform. But when Mark gave us the funding, and we had worked on this thing, and we had talked about, okay, how should we provide, what kind of report should we do for Mark and whatnot, and we came up with this notion that, like many of you who maybe do research, you provide a research report to an organization or to an entity, and it may see the light of day or it may not, and we felt what would be really valuable would be to create a story map that we hope will tell the story and maybe be more accessible to individuals, both researchers and practitioners, who want to get a little bit better idea of how poverty is playing out in the North Central region. So that's kind of what we want to share with you today. We looked at 3 types of poverty. I know for those of you on the call who are familiar with the whole research on poverty and the work that ERS has done over the years, we want to look at persistent poverty. We look at persistent poverty over primarily a 3-decadal period, so it's like 70, 80, 90, or 80, 90, 2000, and then 90, 2000, 2010. We looked at these blocks of 30 years, and a little bit different than what others may have used, but we felt that's the way we want to look at persistent poverty. 20% of individuals in poverty consistently over that long period of time. And then we looked at high poverty, which is just more cross-sectional, 20% 20% of individuals living in poverty, 20% or more, but at a given period in time. And then child poverty the same way, but we looked strictly at 20% of children living in poverty in a particular period of time, 80 or 90 or 2000, whatever. So we want to look at those 3 particular dimensions of poverty. Then we want to look at what we know these spatial dimensions. So we want to look, first of all, we looked at the whole country, and then how it looked across the 4 regions that USDA primarily uses, and our regional rural development centers have the same kind of regional configuration, northeast, north central, south, and west. And then we looked at the 12 states in the North Central region, coupled with the 1,055 counties that are part of the North Central region. Then we looked into the census tract, and the information that Indraneel gave to you is demonstrative of the value of this thing. I mean, we're talking about something in excess of 17,000 census tracts in the North Central region, and we looked at it first collectively, all 17,000 tracts, and then we began to look at it subdivided by metro and then non-metropolitan census tracts. So that's kind of the spatial distribution or spatial focus that we took. Then we want to look at a small variety of socioeconomic variables, and these are listed there. To what extent, for example, may child poverty, how does that look across metropolitan and non-metropolitan areas? And we look at non-metro both as the subdivided of micropolitan and non-core. But we looked at these key variables, and we only use this in cases where there's enough numbers of cases, and I'll tell you a little bit more, like persistent poverty in the North Central region was not very, very large in general, and as a consequence, we were not able to look at how that played out across these different kinds of variables. So we looked at socioeconomic variables whenever that was feasible to do. And so this is what our story map looks like, and we're going to walk you through this in a minute. So we have the overview. We talk a little bit about, again, these three different types of poverty. How is poverty defined? The poverty thresholds and whatnot. But it gives you a little bit of background information. Also recognizes the contribution of the North Central Regional Center to the project, coupled with those of ERS and EDA. And then again, just what I talked about, the different dimensions. The 2 sections that we have not said anything about, but we'll talk about in a little bit later in the webinar, is section 6 and 7. Because, as Mark indicated, the initial discussion about poverty came about at a regional meeting in the North Central region of the directors of Extension, as well as program leaders of Extension. We felt we wanted to try to showcase some of the Extension activities that are relevant to this whole topic of poverty. And then we'll talk a little bit in section 7 about 3 dozen research articles we found that are really specially focused that we thought might be of value to you for those of you who might want to have ready access to research on this particular topic. So we're going to go ahead and walk you through a little bit of the story map now. And again, we thank you for your patience as we try to get this all to work. And I'm going to walk you through a couple sections and urge you to, Mark, can you see that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, consider, okay, great. Okay, great. Okay, so this is what the website looks like. For those of you, you may have been given the link already from Rosa at the North Central Regional Center, which is great. We'd like you to mess around with this, try it out ahead of time. It'd be great. So as you can see, this is what it looks like. And if you bring it down, of course, like a typical story map, it begins to tell you a little bit of story. And as you notice, as I scroll down, the sections pop up. The overview section one, and we're not going to go through this in detail, otherwise we'd be here till midnight and we'd want to do that to you. But I'm going to walk you through just a couple of examples about, for example, in section 2, which gets into, again, this focus primarily on the national and state level. Okay, so as you can see, you want to always go to continue reading, and that takes you into a much more in-depth discussion. And we try to be very, very precise in terms of walking through some of these things. But as you can see, when I bring up section 1, you have the introduction, which is located on the left panel of your screen, and then we have those 3 different options in terms of poverty: persistent, high poverty, and child poverty. And I'm just going to show you a couple of these just to give you an idea of what kind of information you can collect here. As you can see, we looked at the 12 states. I keep saying 13, but it's 12. And you can see how we looked at the number of people who are the number of counties that are persistently poor in the North Central region, and you can see we have it over these 4 different time periods. And if you take your cursor, and I don't know if you can see that, but if you put your cursor and put it over any one of the bars, it's going to show up. It'll show the time period, how many counties in that state were persistent poverty. Then you can keep going through the different time periods, and you'll see that. Again, the best thing for you is to really get into this thing and play around with it, and you'll find some value to it. And then if you were to go to the next one, it's talking then about the percent. Now numbers are great, but percent. Let me see here if I can. The number of counties. Yeah. Okay. So I want to then go into the high poverty and show you a couple examples there. As again, you can see the number of high poverty counties. Again, 20% or more people who are in poverty at a given period of time. And you can see we have 80 and we have 90, 2000 and whatnot. And so Missouri, as you can see, Missouri and South Dakota have a large number of counties that are persistently, that are high poverty. But when you go into the next section, you'll see this is the percent. So the percent and the numbers you can see, obviously, it's really important to look at both of those 2 elements together. And if you look at the bottom, you'll see that you have a full screen. You can go to full screen and be able to literally see that as a full screen, and we do have a way that can be exported, and you can use it into a particular presentation or document that you would want to use for your own work. And so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give it over to Andrey, who's going to get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty with regard to the track level data.
Thank you, Bo, and good afternoon, everyone. So let's go to section 3 that deals with track level data. And let me click on that link again. And here we have this data divided by 3 types. It's all census tracts located in metropolitan areas and in rural counties, or non-metropolitan, as we call those. So let's open that 3rd section, which deals with all census tracts. So here again, the same structure, introduction, and 3 types of poverty. And again, I'm going to focus on high poverty just for the sake of time saving. So first, when I click on that, you can see the map of tracts for this region. and it may take a few seconds because it's so extensive, the data for the map. Let's see if I can get it on the screen. Well, yes, it's there. So it shows it's contrasting two time periods, 1970 and 2016. Yeah, it's a little slow here. So the blue tracts are high poverty in 1970, and pink or red they're high poverty in 2016, and purple they're in high poverty in both time periods. So this is a nice way to see temporal dynamics. So as I scroll down, we can look at again distribution of poverty, high poverty tracts across different states, and it's pretty interesting to contrast, and I encourage you to contrast this with county level data, because here you can see a different picture. Now Ohio and Illinois and Michigan lead this high poverty record, because when you look at the tract level is tells you a different story, because now it's more makes more accent on metropolitan areas with higher population numbers, and you'll see this reflects in other variables too. So as I scroll down, we can see, and this is just, again, this is percentage. We saw tract numbers, and these are percentages. So now we can see the chart. And actually, let me skip through this chart, because the next chart is actually showing similar data. So now we can see metro versus non-metro areas, and you can see increasing population in those metro areas versus, high poverty in metro areas increasing quite a lot since 1970. And here, actually, maybe I can switch to section 4 and show you metropolitan tracts. And let me scroll. Let me switch to high poverty, and then so this is the chart that shows increasing trend for exactly metropolitan tracts. And this is the driving sort of force for all tracts through these years. If we see non-metropolitan, the trend is not that distinctive. So it's metropolitan tracts that lead this trend. So now back to all tracts, and let's look at ethnic and racial distribution. So you can see that, for example, in 1970, 42% of black population lived in high poverty tracts. This percentage decreased somewhat to 2016, but still it's a big share of population. While Hispanics, they started as a small number in 1970, and now 11.6% in 2016 live in high poverty tracts of Hispanic population. We also were looking at the family status of population, and here it shows you percentages of blue bars show percentages of single female living with a child, and again, these are numbers. There is increasing trend up to 2000, and then slight diving number, and then it's started to increase again in 2016. While single male with child, much smaller number, and it's kind of steady increases, but again, this is a very small proportion of population living in high poverty tract. Educational attainment is a quite distinctive trend that you can see in those high poverty tracts, and you can see that in 1970, quite a big share of population had only high school or lower than high school, which is light blue and red part of the bar, living in high poverty. Now in 2016, this number decreased a lot, but still it's almost 50% of population living in high poverty tracts have education lower than high school or high school. And finally, we were looking at, we're presenting maps where you can explore in more depth the geographically as well as on a temporal scale this data. So let me let's yeah, it's okay, it's good. So this is a map of individual poverty rates for this region, and this map has this this window has a map and also some tools in the right upper corner. So you can display a legend of where you can see those percentages living in high poverty in each tract or county. This is a tract map. It just shows county boundaries at this scale. Also, you can see the layer list. And here you can turn on and turn off different layers, which are different years for high poverty. So let's explore the last tool, which is sliding bar, which you can use to compare, nicely compare and see some trends in different areas of this region. So in order to do that, I need to have at least 2 different years turned on. So right now we have individual poverty in 2016. So let me turn on 1990. So I'm done with layers, so I can close that window. And now I'm turning on swipe tool. And again, there might be some wait second of view because it's loading second map. And now it's loaded, and I have to pick, once it's on, I have to pick which layer I want to swipe. And usually it's the layer that is on top. And right now it's 2016. So this way you see on the left from the bar, you can see 2016 data. On the right, it's 1990 data. So in what I want to do, I want to zoom into metropolitan area in Cleveland. But actually, it's a pretty common trend for most metropolitan areas. Chicago, Indianapolis, in our region, you'll see the same trend. So let me, it's a little slower here, but let's get to that. Let's wait. It actually might be faster on your computer. It's when you explore the site, it's just this particular computer that may not be working that fast. So if you look at Cleveland area, and now we can see more detail in terms of census tracts. So it's kind of concentrated in the center of the city, those high poverty tracts in 1990. Now let me slide this bar, and you can see how these tracts spread into suburbs of Cleveland. I can even try and zoom even more so that you can see. So again, this is 1990, and this is 2016. And since the map is kind of slow, I can try, but same trend is actually true for Indianapolis or Chicago. The poverty kind of spreads out to suburbs. In Chicago, it's also moving southward to Gary area and the surrounding areas. Also, you can see that it kind of pops up more in 2016 in rural areas here and there. So also this map, I think if you click on any of these census tracts, you can see some additional information. Yeah, that's interesting. So you can explore this map in more detail and zoom to the region of your interest. And we have similar maps for other poverty types like child or persistent poverty. So I encourage you to go and explore all these sections. It's a nice material. And with that, I will pass this to Bo, and he will also talk about 2 remaining sections of our website dedicated to extension programs and literature.
Thank you, Andrey. I hope you're beginning to see the value and maybe the power of this website. And what I'd like to do now is get back to the last 2 sections. And again, because we, as Mark indicated early on, that what precipitated our work was really the extension leadership saying, hey, we got to look at this issue of poverty and see what can extension do. So what we decided to do is to try to have a section that begins to try to capture what may be some valuable resources that exist within our extension system that deal with directly or indirectly the issue of poverty. And as you can see, we have land-grant institutions that can play a role in addressing poverty. And again, like anything else, you go to the continue reading, and what you'll see is we have a list of the land-grant institutions, as you can see, are listed by that map. But if you go over here where it says extension programs, what you will then find is a resource that we put together that deals with, you'll see all the land-grant institutions, and the left we have all of our 1862 land grants, so we have 2 of our 1890s who are showcased here. And what I'm going to do is just because Michigan State is hosting our call today, let's go to Michigan State, and what you'll see on the right side, you'll see that icon that has Lansing, Mississippi, Michigan, with the Michigan State logo coming up. But on the left, you'll see the panel that gives you a listing of different programs that they have or that we have identified. And by the way, we asked the program leaders in our various program areas, family and consumer science, our community development program primarily, to help us identify web-based resources they had that might deal directly or indirectly with poverty. So so we see how you can, various resources are there. And for example, I'll just go to poverty competency website, and you'll see that they have a very, very nice website that talks about a necessary skill to have in terms of poverty competency. Very, very nice resource. Then if you go to up here on the left, you have the ability to go from one university to the next by just using that little arrow. Or if you don't want to see Michigan State anymore and you want to go to Purdue, we can go there as well by just going to the Purdue website, if I can find it. and I'll show you an example there. Again, we have these different products, and one program that's been very, very popular that we actually adapted, that Purdue adapted from Iowa State University, is called is a program called Strengthening Families, and that'll take you to this program. It's one where families who are having challenges in terms of parenthood is a great program, and this is one of the best programs that exist in the country, if not the world, from all indications. And then if I then go to a final one, for example, like let me go back here. I'll get rid of this one, and I'll go to Iowa State University, and they have a great program there that is called Poverty Tools for. No, that's not the one I want. I apologize. It's Poverty and Food Needs, a very, very nice project, a very nice program they have, and they have all their counties listed, and if you go to any particular county at Iowa State, you'll see how it has a really, really nice thing about poverty and food insecurity, including a lot of really relevant data. A really nice model that others might want to, might consider emulating as far as their own work in their own states if they're not there in Iowa. So that gives you a little feel for that. And if I go back to here, I'm going to do my final section, and that's where we talk about some of the poverty research we've been able to identify. We have about 30 some odd articles and that are there. And the last thing I want to show you here is that if you go to continue reading, We have a list of these. Again, for those of you who are either doing research or want to know a little bit more about poverty from a practitioner standpoint, you'll go there and you'll see. And by the way, we want to give recognition to Liz Dobus. Liz used to be a postdoc with us, is now a postdoc at the Northeast Regional Center for Rural Development. She was instrumental in helping compile this particular site based upon an article that she, Indraneel, and I are publishing in a book. It's going to be coming out in 2019. But you can see we have all these articles by author and year. But the key thing is that if you as you can see, what it does is it brings up a particular article, and you can see that I can actually go to this, and it gives you. Excuse me a bit. It's not working well here. It gives you a little bit of information about the article, what journal, when it was published. But the key thing we want to do is, again, look at what's the discipline, what level, and this is, as you can see, the geography, it's track level. Again, we try to find articles that were more spatially focused. Is it county? Is it a region? Is it a census tract? Is it metro? Is it non-metro? Whatever. And so it's a nice little cheat sheet for those of you who want to kind of know about what are some of the articles out there and what are some of the key findings, as you can see. And so hopefully you'll find that quite of value to you. Now, I'm going to try to go back to our PowerPoint, if I can get to that. And so thank you. So we talked about this in terms of the section on with regard to the poverty both the extension products and the poverty articles, and then just a couple more slides to go, and I'll shut up. How can this site be of value? Clearly, for those of you who are in research, the harmonized data is something to be salivating over. For extension, it really provides us a great way to identify areas of our state, either at the county level or the census tract level, that are opportune places which to do our kind of extension delivery programs that are targeted for people of low wealth. And then the third thing is the kind of helping federal agencies and state agencies look at how can we invest our efforts in areas that have high poverty. As you know, many of you may know federal legislation just came out on opportunity zones. This provides a great resource to be able to look at where are opportunity zones based upon the data we provided and what are some of the attributes related to those. And finally, track changes. If you know of programs, interventions that have been done in some time over the last decade or two, you may be able to use these data, the secondary data, to find out, do we have any evidence that we've moved the needle on improving conditions in some of these areas. What we hope to do in the future is we want to try to obviously update the data and then look at opportunity zones in the North Central region. We may be trying to explore that and provide a proposal to Mark to consider. And then ideally, hopefully we can take this, what we've done with the North Central, and expand that to other regions of the country, if we can find the funding to do so. So with that said, I think I'm going to be quiet, and here's our contact. I mean, Indraneel and Andrey are both available. If you contact me, I'll make sure they get the information. So with that said, Mark, we're open to questions, or and if I have a headset, so if it goes to one of my colleagues, I will quickly pass the headset on to them.
Indraneel and Andrey. Sorry, I said Audrey earlier. Thank you very much. It's a great resource with a lot of valuable information that can be useful for extension programming and research. So really appreciate you sharing all this information. We do have a few minutes for questions. And if you'd like to add a question, you just type it right below here in the webinar chat. And I see Peter is typing a question, so we'll hang on for a moment for that. And Bo, I was going to ask if you were going to do anything with the opportunity zones, and you answered the question. That's great.
Yes.
Fantastic. While we're waiting for questions to come in, we really appreciate your feedback on the webinar. So please take a moment and check on the boxes here. Well, while we're waiting to see if anybody will add a question, I just wanted to ask you about sort of the persistent deep poverty. If you could summarize that, if you think about from 1970 through today, it looks like in certain areas poverty's actually spread, which is really interesting. But what about those pockets where you just have this persistent deep poverty? Can you summarize that in our region? Where are those pockets?
Yes, I'm going to share this with my colleagues too, in case they want to about the deep poverty pockets of poverty in the north central region. As Andrey indicated earlier. Now, I want you to know I'm a rural sociologist by training, and when I worked in the South for a long, long time, I kept pushing and talking about poverty in non-metropolitan areas. That was really the area in the South where poverty was really persistent and it was pretty high. And our data, at least the data on the regional level, will demonstrate that. But when you disaggregate that at a census tract, as Andrey indicated, the story changes. It's really primarily metro. So, Mark, the pockets of poverty are going to be primarily in some of the major metropolitan areas. Cleveland's a perfect example, but there are others as well that.
Exception is the Indian reservation.
Yeah, the Indian reservations would be an exception in North Central region. Obviously, they have a high level of poverty. Now, deep poverty in this context would be what I think ERS would consider 40% or higher, and we do have some of those pockets, but a lot of them are in metropolitan areas. Again, with the exception of the tribal areas of the North Central region. And I think that'd be the primary one. Of course, Appalachia, the parts of Ohio and Kentucky's in the south. Should have been a north central region if you look at the geography, but clearly Appalachia that takes in part of Ohio and beyond has been and that's been primarily white persistent poverty as opposed to minority poverty.
Well, Pam just really appreciated your project and presentation, and she's looking forward to working with the information you provided. So you've got one fan there. Are there
Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions from the group? I know we've been going for nearly an hour, so we want to close things off.
And for those of you on the call, feel free to contact us. I mean, we want this to be valuable to you. That's why Mark was really pleased that we were going into this route instead of just a regular report. We have tried to scrutinize our writing and to make sure all the typographical mistakes have been corrected. If you find them, please send them to us. This is a project that's always obviously a constant improvement phase for us.
Well, very good. I'm so pleased to help support this project. I think it's a great resource for us all. And so thanks to all of your crew who've invested in this project, Bo, Indraneel, and Andrey. Thanks again. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see or talk with you again soon. Right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.